many of you are still working?
It's all the reading.
Give me another 2 minutes. Alright, Quentin and Jamie, it looks like it's working now. Due to technical difficulties, I gave my class their homework early and I gave them about 5 minutes to work on it. So if you want to go ahead and work on it as well, it was pages 26 through 28. Answer questions 1 through 6. So I'll give them another 2 minutes.
What do they have homework time?
We're working on in class.
Why would you give us all this Wednesday?
This is where we're working on classwork. Because it's classwork.
Forget study
Your
hall.
job profitably. Alright, keep going. So if you want to go ahead and pause it, Jamie and Quentin, you can, or you can go ahead and just do it tonight.
What's the day?
Today's still the 19th.
High school.
What was it?
Nope, we'll go over tomorrow.
What's this tomorrow?
Tonight. So if you're already done, then you're already done.
Why is there like
Nope, talk about it later. Not about it right now.
Oh.
Alright, your time's up, so go ahead and put away your homework or classwork, since it's technically classwork. So since you started in class. But if you didn't finish it tonight. Alright, put that away for right now. Let's go ahead and let's go over where we left off last class period. We started talking about the Scrooby congregation and the Pilgrims as they came over. So the Scrooby congregation was led by who? Genesis, put it away. And who led the Scrooby congregation?
Who?
Who was in charge of the Scrooby congregation?
Scrooby congregation? I don't.
Alright, Ethan, you remember?
Robin.
John Robinson. Now remember, they came over on the Mayflower. Originally, they were supposed to have 2 ships. What was the other ship, Brecken? The Speedwell. Alright, so originally they were supposed to go on 2 ships. They only came over on 1. They landed at Cape Cod, but they ended up moving onto the Plymouth section on the mainland of the Massachusetts Bay Area. That's where they ended up forming their colony. Now, keep in mind, they were outside their jurisdiction. What was the document that they all agreed to sign saying that they're going to make good laws and all going to follow them? Chris? Nope, that's for England.
Mayflower Compact.
Mayflower Compact. So that's pretty much where we left off. So look over on page number, we kind of left off on page 23. I don't need your help, page 23. So, make a note for that. The year for it, I believe I talked about it last period, I wrote it on the board, but do make a note that for 1620, that is the date for the founding of New Plymouth. Plymouth is what it gets shortened to, so just make a note, Plymouth or New Plymouth at that point. Alright, your book points out that first winter was rough. At one point, there was only 7 of them that were healthy enough to take care of everybody else. So it was 7 people taking care of about the 100-ish people that originally had come over on the Mayflower. And just because it was a really rough winter, lots of people were sick just because they didn't have time to prepare and get ready for the winter. By the early spring, your book points out only over half the settlers had died by that point. It was a very rough time period. But rather than choosing to go back home, they decided, no, we're going to stay here and stick it out. We're going to try to make this into a colony. Alright, your book points out that they had an Indian friend come over and help them. Does anyone know, just because of Thanksgiving, what was their Indian friend's name? Okay, this is a different Indian friend. S.
It's Sacagawea.
Nope, that's much later. Alright,
Squanto.
Squanto, make it up for Squanto. No, Squanto, he knew English. Your book puts it very nicely that he had visited England and learned to speak English there. What technically happened was he was kidnapped by the Spanish and sold into slavery, and then he escaped to England, and then he finally escaped back to North America. But your book just condensed it and just said that he just visited England, which is a very nice summed up way of putting it. It was a lot more dramatic than that. By the time he got back to North America, though, all of his original people and his tribe had already died, so he was having to live with another people group at the time. That's part of the reason why he was helping out the English, was he could speak English and he could talk to them at the same time. So he became kind of like a close kind of friend with the English because he was their interpreter, helping them with the other North American, Native American tribes. So just make a note that Squanto, he taught the Pilgrims how to survive and thrive in the wilderness. He knew what to do and he was helping them out. By November, that's whenever the Pilgrims were reaping a harvest, and so the Indians, Native Americans, and the Pilgrims decided that they would celebrate and give a day of Thanksgiving. That's one reason why we remember it as Thanksgiving Day. Now, Thanksgiving Day for us shifts around because it's the fourth Thursday of November. That's why it shifts slightly from year to year, and it's not like a die-hard day. Also, we don't know exactly when they celebrated it because traditionally we just pick November for it. We don't know for sure if it was in the summer or the fall for them. But your book just points out by the time we reap a good harvest in the fall, that's whenever we decided to make Thanksgiving be that fourth Thursday of November. So just make a note, that was the first Thanksgiving. Alright, the successful colony. So, William Brewster, this was the pastor for the Scrooby congregation living in the New World. Because remember, John Robinson, he stayed over in Europe because that's where most of his congregation was, so he stayed with them to help be a pastor for them. So they chose William Brewster. Just make a note for him that he was the Pilgrims' pastor, since their original pastor stayed over in Europe. They elected John Carver to be the first governor. Unfortunately, he died, so they had to choose somebody else. He didn't make it a full year. They elected him in November, and he died in the spring, so he didn't make it long at all. So just make a note, John Carver was technically voted first, but he died. So they had to choose somebody else. So William Bradford, that was the second governor, but he was a lot more well known just because he wrote the history of Plymouth Plantation. To make a note for that, that was the first American history book just saying what happened to the Pilgrims. So kind of like a captain's log, he kept track over what happened to the Pilgrims. So this became the Americans' first history book. Speaking of that, History of Plymouth Plantation, William Bradford wrote it, and it was the first American history book. Originally, they were supposed to have a common store system as well. Remember, what's the common store system? And you remember from Jamestown, right?
Everyone puts in, and you just take out what you need.
Yeah. No, did it work for the people of Jamestown?
Nine.
Yep. Now, Pilgrims decided that they would try it too, and it didn't work either. So they understood, okay, even though we're all Christians and we're supposed to work hard as unto God, Christians can still be sinners, and Christians can still be lazy, and Christians can still make poor life choices. So because of that, it didn't work for them either. Your book has a quote by Governor Bradford at this point talking about how he eventually said, nope, we're not doing common store system. We're going to do each person is responsible and for themselves. Look at this quote towards the middle of the page. You want to read it?
Me.
Genesis.
This had very good success, for it made all hands very industrious, so as much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been by any means the governor or any other could use, and saved a great deal of trouble and gave far better content.
Because people understood, I'm going to plant corn or food for my family. I'm going to go out there and plant them. I'm going to plant a lot of corn because I want my family to have a lot of food. So it was to help out, and the governor didn't have to go out and try to get people to go plant corn for everyone. Each family did it for themselves. So it saved the governor a lot of hassle and a lot of trouble, and it also made each person want to do well for their own family. So, just as a side note, a lot of people assume, well, if we were all Christians, then communism could work. Typically no, because Christians are still sinners, and it's still, even if everyone was saved, they're still going to have that sin nature, and so because of that, communism goes bad really quickly, because anytime you have to force someone to do something for the good of everyone, it doesn't work out well, and it ends up turning into slavery in a really bad situation. Alright, your book points out, by 1627, the Pilgrims had paid their debt back to the English businessmen who had founded them, and they became a self-governing colony. Eventually, Plymouth colony gets absorbed into the Massachusetts Bay colony, which is a lot larger than them. Just making it know that they were virtually self-governing until they get absorbed into the larger colony later on. Alright, any questions about them? Alright, proceedings for liberty. They had several important things that they established. The first one was the General Court. Make a note for that on page 25. The General Court was a democratic legislative body called the General Court. It was a democratic legislative body, but it also passed laws, carried out provisions of the laws, and judged cases and controversies under the law. It was kind of like our Congress and Supreme Court combined into one thing. They made laws, and they also carried out the laws, and they also interpreted the laws. So it's kind of like one big giant government smashed into one area. Now, for them, no, your book points out as well, it was consisted of all the freemen. To be a freeman, you had to be 21 years old, you had to have a good reputation, and you had to be a permanent settler. Why do you think you had to be a permanent settler if you're going to be part of the government of the colony?
If you're an Indian, why would you be a part of the colony?
Okay, that's not part of it. It's a permanent settler. So if the
You're
Indian
a
wanted to,
citizen.
like, if the Indian wanted to stay there, they could.
You have to be permanent, so you can't portray them.
Okay, partly, but it's the idea of, they understood, okay, if you're going to live here, then yes, you should have a say in the laws that govern over you. If you're just like a trader, like with fur trade, like a trapper, going through the area, do you ultimately care what the laws are of the area? Not really. So because if they say no, you have to be a permanent settler. So if a Native American wanted to live in the area and live in the town and marry someone and stay there, then yeah, they could. It was the idea of you just have to live here, you have to have a good reputation, you have to be 21 years old. So those were your 3 qualifications to be part of the general court. Eventually, the general court gets so large where it's not practical for everyone to meet, so they had to switch over to a representative democracy, where they would have to send over people later on. Just make a note that for this early stages, this is technically a representative democracy, so make a note for that where everyone goes and votes. But because this becomes practical later on, they're going to have to switch over. They also understood the idea of a religious liberty. They had no established churches. Now, we're going to talk about this difference with the Puritans in Massachusetts. You did not have to be a separatist to live in Plymouth. You could be of a different denomination if you wanted to. They just understood that in order for people to worship God as how they best see fit, you need to give them the freedom to worship God as how they see fit. And so that was part of one of the important precedents that they said as well. Okay, I'm out of time. Okay, we'll stop there. So don't forget, 3 pages 26